So in this video I want to review some of the basic controls in Blender. So if you open up a new project in Blender, it's going to look basically like this. You should see just a few things here. There's a light, there's a cube, this is a camera. To start with, let's talk about moving your own camera view around the scene so we can get a different point of view in our scene. So you'll need a 3-button mouse for this. So that's a mouse with a left click, a right click, and a scroll wheel. So I can scroll the scroll wheel in and out to zoom my camera. I can click in that scroll wheel. So I'm clicking and holding that scroll wheel and then dragging my cursor to orbit. And then if I hold shift and click that scroll wheel in and drag it, I'll pan. While I'm doing this, you can see there's a lot of little tips at the bottom of the menu here in Blender that give you some hints about things you could do. So right now, if I left click on something, I'll select it. Click and drag is going to be my box select. Click and drag the scroll wheel is going to be rotate view. And then right clicking gives me the object context menu. So that's moving the camera. I can also move the camera by clicking and dragging this widget in the upper right corner of this 3D view. I can click on these different axes to look at it from a side-on perspective. And then if I just use my scroll wheel button again, click and drag it, I can orbit around again. Okay, to select some objects here, I'm just going to click on them. Here's my light and my camera, and here's my cube. Now for this demo, I don't need a light or a camera, so I'll just select them both. I can do this either by clicking on one, holding the shift key, and clicking on the next one, or I can click and drag over both of them like that to do this box selection and select them both. With both of them selected, I'll press the X key to delete them. And that brings up this little window here asking if I'm sure I want to do that. You also can do that probably from this drop-down menu here. Yep, here it is towards the bottom. Delete. So that's the X key to delete objects. This cube, I don't want to delete it. We're going to work with it a little bit. I can see here in my view that I've moved this cube a little bit off center here, which is okay. So there's a few different ways I could move this thing around. With it selected, on my right, we'll see this kind of inspector window with different information about this cube. And I can change its location right here. As long as I've got this orange box, this is the information for this object in this tab, the Object Properties tab. As long as I've got that clicked in, I can find my location here. So I can set the x-axis to 0, y-axis to 0, z-axis to 0. Also, while I'm over here, I'll point out this window here. Gives me an outliner view of the whole scene. So right now I just have my cube. But if I hit Control-Z a few times, you'll see, there we go. There's that camera, that light, that cube. So this shows me everything in this scene in kind of a list view. And I can also delete and select stuff in here. Let's see if I do that. There we go. So now I've selected those things and I can delete them. All right. So, and I'll recenter my cube here. I could also control the rotation and scale from here. Somehow this thing got scaled. I'm not quite sure what I did, but I'll reset that all to its defaults. If you're more used to using those kind of visual widgets to move things around, those are here on the left-hand side of the screen. Blender will often position convenient tools right here for you to use. So things that you're going to use all the time, such as move, rotate, scale. And then this tool here, the transform tool, gives you this really complex looking widget, but it's actually not so bad, that you can use to move the object around on different axes. You can rotate it. And then with these little boxes, you can scale it along different axes as well. And of course, each of those is also available as its own widget, the move, rotate, and scale. If you want to move something on the ground plane, you can click on these little squares in the different corners of this widget. So if I want to move on the ground plane, that's the plane defined by the vector z. So if I click on this little blue thing, which matches my Z, it's going to move on that ground plane. So I can scoot it over there. You can see that, well, I'll get to that in a second. Rotation, you can rotate around different axes or around the camera view. You can scale either along a plane or along an axis like that. And that's kind of it for these tools. Now, the way that I actually tend to work with Blender is not usually with this little window over here, and I don't usually use these buttons over here if I can help it. What I really strongly recommend that you do is learn some of the keyboard shortcuts that are available to you in Blender. Okay, so just to show you some of these, the move, rotate, and scale. To move an object, you press the G key. So you can think of this as our grab key. So I'll press G to grab it, and then I can move it around. Now let's say I wanted to move my cube maybe over to this corner. So it's flat on the ground, but over here on this corner. I can press the G key to do that and then scoot it over there. And it might be sort of close, but as soon as I rotate my camera around, I can see that it's not exactly where I wanted it to be. It's kind of moved in an unexpected way. So here I'm going to try to move it just to this corner here. You'll see it more dramatically. It's nowhere near that corner. It's up here floating in the sky. So this is because when we're pressing G to move, it's sort of moving this cube along the image plane of our camera or our view. So where it moves it to is going to depend on which way we're looking. So it sometimes is useful to move things this way, but a lot of the time it's kind of unintuitive. So we can constrain the way this cube is moving with a few different techniques. So if I press the G key to grab and move, let's say I want to move along the y-axis here. I'll press the G key to grab it and move it, and then I'll press Y, and that's going to lock this to that y-axis, that green axis there. Now I can put it where I want it, and now I can move it again. I can press G, and then I'll press X I'll press G, and then press X this time, and now it's going to be locked to that X-axis. And you can see I've got a lighter colored red line passing through my cube along the X-axis. So now I was able to move this cube over to this corner by locking or constraining its movement. Now, sometimes you may want to, there's an easier way to move it to that corner. Instead of saying I'll move along the y-axis so far and along the z-axis the x-axis so far, instead I can force it to move along the XY plane, along the ground plane. To do that, I'll press the G key again, and then I'll hold Shift and I'll press the Z button. So now this is going to move that cube in any axis except for Z. So I pressed, that was G, then Shift, then Z. And that says move that cube in every axis except for Z. So now I can move it to that corner, and we can see that it is right where I wanted it in place. You can get even more precise with this. If I wanted to say move 1 unit along the y-axis, well, I could type out a little, almost like a little phrase to describe that. I'll just say G, and then I'll say Y, and then I'll type 1. And you can see that moved my cube in the y-axis by 1 unit. I'll do it again. So that's G, Y, and this time maybe I'll move it a little further. I'll say 9. And that moved it 9 spaces. Now, anytime I'm in the middle of an operation like this, you can see my cube is highlighted in white right now. It means I'm in the middle of doing something to it. If I change my mind and I decide I don't want to move it after all, while it's still white, I can right-click to cancel this action that I'm doing. So you've seen me do that a lot already, but I've been right-clicking if I mess up and want to send it back to where I started. For instance, earlier when I did this, my cube is somewhere way off in the distance. I don't want it there. I'll just right-click rather than confirm it. Or if I left-click, that confirms the move. Excuse me. All right. So I can do G and then X to move on the X-axis, G and then Y to move on the Y-axis. G and then Z to move up and down on that Z axis. Then I can constrain to a plane by saying G and then Shift Z, and that's going to say move in any axis except for Z. I could also do G Shift Y to move in any axis except for Y. Here, I'll recenter all this stuff. Now we also can do, and I'll go back to this tool, we can do a lot of the same things for our rotation. So I can, to start with, I can just press the R key to begin rotating. And this will rotate around basically a laser beam that comes from our point of view and shoots through that object. So you can see I'm rotating relative to where I'm looking at it from. Whoops. This can be useful sometimes, but again, it's kind of weird and kind of unconstrained. If you're looking at it from the top down, for instance, this can be convenient, but from basically any other angle, it's a little unpredictable what it's going to do. So again, we can constrain this. So I'll press R to rotate, and then let's say I want to rotate around the Z axis. I'll type Z next, so R and then Z. Now I'm confined to rotating around the Z axis. If I wanted to then say I'll rotate this by 45 degrees around the Z axis, I'll type 45 right there, and now I'll click. So now my cube here is rotated 45 degrees around the Z axis, as you can see there, and as you can see just by looking at it. The scale tool is similar, so I'll press S to scale, and now I can scale it. This one is a little easier to use without constraints, but you can still constrain it actually. So I can just press S, and then let's say I wanted to scale it by 2 exactly, type 2, and now that cube is twice as big. I could also scale only in one or the other axis, so I could scale and then X to scale that thing out like this, scale and then Y to scale it along the Y axis. I could do scale and Z. Oops, I messed that up a little bit. Okay, so I could do S to scale and then type Z, and now I'm scaling vertically along the Z axis. I can also do that Shift Z thing, so scale Shift Z to only scale on the X and Y axis and not the Z axis. So these tools all have a lot in common. It's G to grab and move, R to rotate, S to scale. And then after that, you can type in a command, basically. So S along the X axis by 5, for instance, scales that up. All right, so that's manipulating an object. Now we want to talk about how do we manipulate or change the vertices inside of this object. To do that, we need to go into edit mode. So there's kind of 2 main modes. There's object mode, which lets us lay out a scene with different objects. And then there's edit mode, which lets us go in and change the vertices of an individual object, change its shape. So I'll click on the object that I want to edit, which is my cube. And then in the upper left, I can find this drop down that says object mode, and I'll switch to edit mode. You will probably be able to also do this switch by selecting this object and pressing the tab key. I've got mine set up a little differently, so it brings up this radial menu. But you can press tab and it should bring you into this edit mode. Once I'm here, I can click on different vertices to select them. I can press the G key to move them. I still have all my same constraints here. The X key will constrain this on the X axis. The Y key will constrain this on the Y axis. Z key will constrain it on the Z axis. I can click on multiple vertices and move them all together, like so. I can scale them, grab them, rotate them. And of course, those constraints all still apply here as well. So one thing is kind of different about this mode is that we have a few different selection modes here. So right now I'm selecting the vertices of this mesh. So the individual points that make up this shape. But I can also select edges with this button right here. And now I can click on the edges and select those and move them around and even scale them if I want to. I can also click on this to select faces. Okay. So one of the most common ways that you'll add new geometry to your model, so build it out, add more features to it, whatever, is by extruding new pieces of your mesh. So the shortcut to do this is the E key. So with a face that I want to extrude selected, I'll press E, and then I'll just drag it out. And you can see now I've got a whole new set of faces that are making up this mesh. You don't have to do this one face at a time. You can select multiple faces and extrude that as well, like this. So this is doing an extrusion. If you don't like working with these keyboard shortcuts, there's also an extrude tool over here on the left side. And you can see there's a few more tools here, which I'll talk about a few of them in this video. So here's the extrude region tool. So I can click on something with that, and now it gives me this little handle that I can click on to move things around. But if you can get comfortable with it, I think it is really nice to be able to just use this keyboard shortcut, just the E key to extrude. That's one thing I like about a lot of the keyboard shortcuts in Blender, is that they sort of have a logic to them, right? So rotate is R, S is scale, E is extrude, X is delete, which sort of makes sense if you think like you're crossing it out, and more. So anyway, that's our extrusion. We can extrude faces. We can also extrude individual points like this. I can click on a point and extrude it out. Now I'm taking a point and moving it out. It creates an edge connecting those two vertices here. You can also select an edge and extrude that, which gives you a whole new face. I'll just hit undo. Now I'm hitting Control Z to undo this, but I also could press the X key to delete geometry that I don't want. You might notice here though that this gives me a lot more options than I had before. In this case, if I delete these vertices, it's also going to delete any edges and faces that are defined by these vertices. So if I delete these two vertices, it's actually going to get rid of this entire face here. So I'll press X to delete that, delete the vertices. However, if I just deleted this edge, I think I actually can just do it like this, yeah. If I delete the edge, I still have these other two edges and even these two vertices here. However, that face is gone. It's also possible for me to just delete the faces. Oh, maybe not. I thought it was. Oh, I can delete only the faces and leave the edges and vertices behind too. Delete edges. So you have a lot more options when you're deleting things in edit mode. Now, let's say I decided that I've added too many loops across this box. So a lot of times when we're modeling, we'll try to build things with square shapes so that we can have a loop of these edges that goes all the way around our shape. And that's really a useful way to model. It makes it a lot easier in a lot of ways that you'll get into later. But let's say I decided I actually wanted less geometry here and I wanted to remove it. There's another option besides just deleting these edges and reconstructing this mesh. So to start with, I'll select this entire edge loop. This is one reason that it's useful to work with edge loops. I'll press the Alt key and then click on one of the edges in this loop, and it will continue that selection all the way around my mesh. So that was the Alt key. I hold Alt and click, and it will select everything. I can also hold Alt and Shift to select multiple edge loops like this, or like this. You can also do this when you're in vertex selection mode. And which edge loops you select depends on, well, which edge you're on, basically, like that. So let's say I want to get rid of this edge loop but leave the underlying shape the way it was. I'll press X, but instead of deleting these vertices, edges, faces, or whatever, I can dissolve them. So that's going to get rid of these edges, but try to leave the rest of the geometry alone. And you can see now it's reduced the number of vertices here. Okay, one last thing. Maybe you've seen me do this already. You can also fill in faces like this. So let's say I've deleted this face and I decide I want to put it back. Well, I can select either the vertices that I want to have make up this new face. So that's 4 vertices. Or I can select a couple of edges and I'll press the F key. So that's F for fill. You could also do it if you, say you've extruded out a couple of vertices like that. If I select this vertex and I press the F key, it's going to make a new edge between them. If I select those 2 vertices and these 2 vertices, it'll make a face with all of those. So that F key or fill key is going to fill in geometry based on what you have selected. All right. I kind of think that's good for this video. A couple of things with the extrude tool. I'll get out of this mode and I'll delete this. Let's say I'm working with a cylindrical object and I want to, well, I'll just show you how I'd model something cylindrical like a cup or a bottle. So to start with, I'll add a cylinder to this scene. So from this menu here, up in object mode, I've switched back to object mode. I'll go to mesh, and then I'll add a cylinder. You can see there's a few different basic shapes that you can start with here, but I'll add my cylinder. And now I'll go into edit mode, which you can do with the tab key. I'll be in face selection mode, and I will scale this down. Or, move this down like this. So I can grab this thing, press the Z key, pull it up. I can scale it so it comes out. Now I can, to add some of the details maybe around the lip of this cup, I can press the extrude key, the E key, so I've got a new piece of geometry extruded. But instead of moving it anywhere, I'll then press the S key to scale it. And you can see then I can pull this piece of geometry out a little bit. Then I'll press the E key again to extrude it up vertically. E key again, I'll leave it be where it is though, and then scale it in like that. Then I'll extrude again, grab it, move it down. I can see that the inside of my cup is poking out of it. So now I'll just scale it down until it's inside my cup a little bit. So now I've got all this detail, and that was from extruding, moving, and extruding and scaling stuff just with this cylinder here. Maybe I'll pull the bottom of that cup up a little bit, and I can show it again on the bottom here. So a lot of times like a paper cup will have a little lip on the bottom. I'll press the E key to do an extrusion. I'll scale it to pull it in, and then I'll press the E key to do another extrusion and pull it down a little bit. So now I've got a cup, paper cup, or a bucket or something like that. So that's a few modeling basics for you. I think that should go a long ways towards getting you started.